The war had dragged on for years. The Xirok, a ruthless and relentless alien empire, had set their sights on Earth and its people, confident that they could crush humanity in one final push. Their fleet was vast, their technology advanced beyond anything humans had ever seen. It seemed as though Earth's fate was sealed. The once proud human forces had been shattered, scattered across the stars, and the capital city, now reduced to ruins, stood as a grim reminder of the inevitable. On the flagship of the Xirok Armada, high above the dying planet, the alien leaders reveled in their victory. They raised their glasses, toasting to the fall of humanity, believing that their reign of terror had finally come to an end. They, celebrated as the last remaining survivors of the human race hid in the shadows, helpless and broken. But what the Xirok did not know was that their victory was not as absolute as they thought. As they drank in triumph, far below, in the wreckage of what used to be Earth's final bastion, there was a glimmer of hope. Against all odds, a single human ship, the Phoenix, had survived. It was small, battered, and barely functional. But it was still alive, hidden within the debris of a world on the brink of destruction. Commander Elena Pierce, once a decorated officer in the human fleet, now found herself leading a ragtag crew of survivors. The ship's engines were barely operational, the weapon systems barely functional, and the morale was at an all-time low. But Elena was not one to surrender, and neither were the men and women who followed her. They had seen their families and friends wiped out, their cities reduced to ash, but their spirit was not yet broken. In the quiet, darkened cockpit of the Phoenix, Elena stood in front of the command console, gazing at the ruined planet below. "Humanity isn't finished," she whispered to herself, the weight of the words heavy in the air. They weren't just words. They were a promise. A promise to the countless fallen, a promise to every soldier who had died on Earth's surface, and a promise to the human race as a whole. The Phoenix was all that remained, but in its broken hull, there was still a spark of defiance, a spark that refused to die. As the Xirok basked in their arrogance, their celebrations filled with laughter and praise, the crew of the Phoenix worked quietly, in secret, to rebuild. They repaired what they could, scavenged what was left, and began formulating a plan. They knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but they also knew something that the Xirok did not. The strength of the human will was not something that could be calculated. It was unpredictable, it was fierce, and it had an uncanny ability to rise, even when everything seemed lost. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the Xirok had started to regroup. The victory they believed they had won was far from the end. Their fleet had sustained heavy damage in the final battle over Earth, and they hadn't anticipated the human survivors being capable of holding on, let alone fighting back. But that is exactly what humanity was doing. The Phoenix, though small and weakened, was a symbol. As word of its survival spread, it was enough to stir something deep within the hearts of the remaining humans scattered across the galaxy. They had not forgotten who they were. They had not forgotten the fire that burned within them, the courage that had once led them to explore the stars, to create, and to conquer. They would rise again. With every piece of equipment the crew of the Phoenix scavenged, with every tiny victory they claimed, their message became clearer. The Xirok had made a mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to endure. They thought they had destroyed them, but instead, they had awoken something far more dangerous. Hope. It spread like wildfire, and across the galaxy, scattered human colonies and fleets began to rally. Resistance movements formed in the shadows, hidden in asteroid fields, aboard derelict space stations, and in the forgotten corners of the universe. They all shared one message: humanity was not finished. It was just beginning. And the Xirok, for all their power, would soon learn that their victory was nothing more than the calm before the storm. The Xirok fleet had scattered across the galaxy, drunk on their so-called victory. Their forces now controlled countless star systems, their warships patrolling every corner of space. They were confident in their dominance, so sure that humanity had been wiped out. The high-ranking officials of the Xirac Empire spent their days in celebration, relishing the fruits of their conquest, believing no one would dare challenge them again. They had crushed Earth's defenses, and they thought they had broken the will of its people. But there was something the Xirac had missed. The Phoenix, though battered and scarred, was far from finished. The human survivors aboard it, led by Commander Elena Pierce, were far from broken. They had lost so much, yet their spirit remained unyielding, burning brighter than ever. In the shadow of a ravaged planet, Elena and her crew made a discovery that would change everything. Deep within the ship's data core, buried under layers of debris and forgotten code, they uncovered something extraordinary. An ancient military database, one that had been lost for generations. This database contained highly advanced, long-forgotten weapons technology, weapons that could challenge even the most formidable of the Xirac Armada. But this technology was not just a means of defense. It was a weapon designed to shift the balance of power. Elena knew that this was their chance, their last hope. But retrieving the technology would not be easy. The Phoenix was hardly equipped for such a task, and the Xirac fleet, though scattered, still held immense power. Despite these odds, Elena and her most trusted allies, a small group of elite soldiers, scientists, and engineers, began crafting a plan. Their mission was simple in theory, though nearly impossible in practice. Infiltrate a key Xirac station, steal a piece of critical technology, and use it to access the Xirac's fleet communications. This would allow them to hack into the alien fleet's network, sow confusion, and possibly even cripple the Xirac's ability to coordinate their forces. The crew of the Phoenix was small, barely a fraction of what humanity had once been, but they were driven by a singular, burning goal: to show the Xirac that humanity was not finished, that they were not a defeated species to be written off. With every move they made, they operated with absolute precision, relying on the ingenuity and resourcefulness that had always been the core strength of humanity. The mission itself was a gamble, but the Phoenix had no choice. It was their one shot. As the team of soldiers led by Elena slipped through the blackness of space, they executed their plan with military efficiency. They made use of every scrap of technology they had, masking their presence from the Xirac's sensors, and silently boarding the enemy station, which was located on the far edge of an uninhabited system. The station was a fortress, filled with alien guards and high-tech security systems. But the humans, working in the shadows, were silent and unseen, using their knowledge of the Xirac's weaknesses to slip by unnoticed. They infiltrated the heart of the station, located the key piece of technology, an advanced data relay system, and, in a near impossible act of daring, stole it. But their troubles were far from over. As they made their escape, alarms blared. Across the station, the Xirac, realizing that someone had broken in. A violent chase ensued, the crew fighting for their lives as they raced against time. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, they made it back to the Phoenix, their prize in hand. With the data relay system in their possession, the Phoenix crew returned to their ship and immediately began the process of hacking into the Xirac fleet's communication network. And just as the crew feared they might be caught in a trap, they managed to send out one final defiant message to the Xirac. The fight isn't over. The message was broadcasted across the galaxy, transmitted directly into the heart of the Xirac command network, leaving the aliens stunned and confused. For the first time in years, the Xirac realized that humanity had not only survived, they had just begun to fight back. The Xirac had underestimated the will of humanity. And now, they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The Xirac fleet, still reeling from the unexpected message, initially dismissed it as nothing more than a last-ditch cry for help from a handful of desperate survivors. To them, humanity was already a defeated species, broken and scattered across the galaxy. But as the days passed and the message echoed throughout the vast expanse of space, the Xirac commanders began to feel an unsettling unease. There was something about that simple phrase, "The fight isn't over," that didn't sit right. It was more than just a cry. It was a declaration, a challenge that ignited a spark they hadn't anticipated. Humanity was far from finished. Across the galaxy, humanity's resilience began to spread like wildfire. What had started as a whisper of defiance quickly grew into a rallying cry that reached planets once thought lost to the Xirac Empire. Small groups of survivors, scattered among the stars, found each other, linked by their shared desire to resist. Former colonies that had fallen under Xirac rule began stirring. The spirit of freedom, so deeply ingrained in humanity, could not be extinguished. People who had once bowed to the might of the invaders now stood tall, inspired by the audacity of those aboard the Phoenix. The Xirac, caught off guard by the sudden surge of resistance, scrambled to reassert control. But the humans were not, sitting idly by. Commander Elena Pierce and her ragtag crew aboard the Phoenix launched a series of daring raids that shook the invaders to their core. They targeted Xirac communication hubs and vital infrastructure, places that, though small in the grand scheme of things, were essential to the alien empire's control. Each mission, though dangerous and often barely successful, was a victory in its own right. They didn't have the numbers, nor the firepower of the Xirac, but they had something far more dangerous: ingenuity, unpredictability, and an unrelenting will to fight. The crew of the Phoenix executed these lightning-fast raids with surgical precision, slipping in and out of enemy territory before the Xirac even knew what had happened. They had no grand strategy, no enormous army, only small, effective operations that disrupted the Xirac's grip on the galaxy. Each victory, no matter how small, sent a ripple through the Xirac ranks. Their once unstoppable forces were beginning to feel the pressure, and soon, the cracks began to show. The Xirac commanders were no longer sure of their victory. The battle lines they had drawn, the systems they had conquered, all seemed to be slipping away, one piece at a time. Humans were not just defending their homes. They were taking the fight to the invaders in ways the Xirac had never expected. The Phoenix's crew had become masters of guerrilla warfare, using their knowledge of the Xirac's weaknesses and overconfidence to their advantage. With every attack, they demonstrated a fundamental truth that the Xirac had overlooked: humans would never bow to their invaders. The Phoenix was no longer just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's unwavering resolve. The crew, though small in number, had become an inspiration to those still hidden in the far reaches of space. Resistance movements were popping up everywhere, fueled by the belief that humanity could push back against the Xirac Empire. There were whispers of human fleets gathering in secret, of former enemies now willing to ally with them, all united by the realization that if humanity could fight, so could they. But the Xirac were not blind to this growing threat. As they scrambled to reinforce their hold on the galaxy, they began making mistakes, overextending themselves, spreading their forces too thin, underestimating the humans' ability to adapt. It was a costly miscalculation. The Phoenix's crew continued to strike, their raids becoming more daring, more successful. The Xirac found themselves stretched thin, trying to put out fires in every corner of their empire. The humans weren't just making noise anymore. They were carving out a path of resistance that no one could ignore. And with each raid, they proved that the fight for freedom was far from over. Humanity had awakened, and this time, the Xirac were not prepared for the storm that was coming. The human spirit, once thought broken, was now the sharpest weapon in the galaxy. As the Xirac fleet began to grasp the true extent of humanity's resurgence, the aliens knew they could no longer underestimate their adversaries. Commander Pierce's message had sparked a fire that spread faster than they could contain. The resistance was growing stronger, more coordinated. Small victories had turned into something bigger, a force that could no longer be ignored. To crush the humans once and for all, the Xirac unleashed their most terrifying weapon, the Dread Reaver. This monstrous warship, a towering symbol of Xirac power, was capable of eradicating entire planets with a single strike. Armed with cutting-edge weapons and a near-impenetrable defense system, it was the Xirac's ultimate tool of destruction. When the Dread Reaver was deployed, it was clear the Xirac were sending a message. Humanity's time was up. As the massive ship advanced, shadowing the Phoenix and its small fleet of human resistance vessels, the threat was undeniable. The Dread Reaver loomed over them, ready to annihilate everything in its path. Yet, Commander Elena Pierce wasn't ready to surrender. She had seen what her people were capable of, and she knew that they had one final chance to strike at the heart of the Xirac Empire. The Phoenix wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's defiance. If they were going to win, they had to make a bold move. A strike at the very core of Xirac power. The Xirac homeworld, a heavily fortified planet at the center of their empire, was the nerve center of their military and political control. It was also their greatest vulnerability. The Dread Reaver was powerful, but it could only protect so much. If humanity could land on their homeworld, infiltrate their command station, and disable their leadership, they could break the Xirac's hold on the galaxy. But this was no ordinary mission. It was a desperate all-or-nothing gamble. The human fleet, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, launched a full-scale assault on the Xirac homeworld. With limited resources and the constant threat of the Dread Reaver hovering above them, the humans descended on the planet's surface with all the fury and determination they could muster. It was an assault that seemed impossible, but in the heart of the battle, there was no turning back. The Xirac generals, once so confident in their invulnerability, were thrown into chaos. The human tactics, born of necessity and desperation, caught them off guard. The Xirac military was known for its precision and overwhelming force, but the humans had something they didn't: unpredictability. They were resourceful, agile, and driven by a desire to reclaim their freedom at any cost. The Xirac were forced to fight on ground they hadn't prepared for. Every street, every building, became a battleground. The humans were everywhere, striking in small, coordinated groups, using guerrilla tactics to sow confusion and chaos. The Xirac's technological superiority, while formidable, began to show cracks. Their advanced weapons and defenses were no match for the cunning and relentless spirit of the human resistance. Every Xirac general sent to quell the uprising found themselves outmatched by the ingenuity of human soldiers. As the battle raged on, Elena and her team advanced deeper into the capital city, their objective clear: the Xirac Central Command Station. If they could take out the heart of the Xirac leadership, they could cripple their empire. Yet, as they pushed forward, it became clear that the Xirac were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting for survival. In the midst of the chaos, the Dread Reaver hovered menacingly above, ready to unleash its devastating power on the humans below. But it was not enough. The spirit of humanity proved to be more formidable than the Xirac had ever imagined. The battle for the Xirac homeworld became a symbol of humanity's defiance. The Xirac, for all their technological might, could not defeat the heart and adaptability of the human warriors. As the dust settled and the humans fought their way to the heart of the Xirac command station, the tide had shifted. The humans were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And for the first time in the war, the Xirac were beginning to fear that they might lose everything. The final battle had begun, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The Xirac, once so confident in their overwhelming power, now found themselves struggling to maintain control. Their forces were fractured, their fleet battered by years of skirmishes and raids launched by the ever-growing human resistance. Commander Elena Pierce, leading the charge aboard the Phoenix, knew that this moment was humanity's last chance to strike a decisive blow. She had spent years watching her people fall, witnessing the destruction of her homeworld, but now, finally, she could see the first glimmer of hope. However, the Xirac leadership, in their arrogance, made a crucial mistake. They underestimated humanity's resolve. As the battle raged on in the ruins of the Xirac capital, Commander Pierce used the very technology the humans had stolen from their invaders to gain the upper hand. It was a gamble, but one that could change everything. With a swift, calculated move, she hijacked the Xirac communication network and broadcast a message that would echo across the stars. For years, humanity had been forced into the shadows, its spirit crushed under the weight of the Xirac's power. But Pierce's words shattered the silence. "We are not defeated," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We are not broken. The human spirit cannot be crushed. No matter how many times we fall, we will rise again." The message wasn't just a rallying cry. It was a declaration that the war was far from over. It reached every corner of the galaxy, inspiring those who had once hidden in fear to take action. Across the stars, humanity's unyielding will began to spark a coordinated uprising. Colonies once enslaved by the Xirac were now rising up, armed with nothing but their determination and the hope that perhaps they could win this fight. The Xirac commanders, now fully aware of the growing human resistance, were taken by surprise. The relentless attacks, the unpredictability, the refusal to back down, everything they thought they knew about humanity had been shattered. For the first time, they faltered. But the humans had more than just the element of surprise. They had the drive to finish what they had started. With the Phoenix leading the charge, the human resistance launched an all-out assault on the Xirac flagship, the Dreadreaver, which had once been thought invincible. The flagship, still looming over the battlefield, became the final target in a war that had raged for so long. Commander Pierce knew that the Dreadreaver was the symbol of the Xirac's dominance, and destroying it would send a powerful message. The human fleet struck with everything they had. It was a coordinated, well-planned attack, but it was also born from desperation and the unbreakable will of humanity. The battle was fierce, a clash of the Xirac's superior technology against the raw determination of human warriors. The Xirac commanders tried to regroup, throwing everything they had at the advancing human forces. But it wasn't enough. The humans, now fueled by the belief that they could win, pushed forward with everything they had. In the heart of the conflict, Commander Pierce, aboard the Phoenix, delivered the final blow. With a direct strike, the Phoenix tore through the defenses of the Dreadreaver, shattering its core and causing the massive warship to break apart. The Xirac flagship was no more. The battle was over. The Xirac fleet, already in disarray, was decimated. The empire that had once seemed unstoppable now lay in ruins. For the first time in years, humanity had turned the tide of war. The galaxy, watched in awe as the very species the Xirac had sought to obliterate stood victorious, defiant to the end. The Xirac, who had once toiled in their belief that humanity was finished, now tasted the bitter sting of defeat. They had underestimated the power of the human spirit, and in doing so they had sealed their own fate. Word of humanity's victory spread quickly, and it became more than just a military triumph. It became a symbol of hope. The legend of humanity's unbreakable will became a beacon, inspiring countless others who had long been oppressed. The Xirac were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. Their empire had fallen, shattered by the courage and resolve of those they had once believed to be their greatest weakness. The war was over, but the message was clear. Humanity would never be broken. And from that day forward, the galaxy would remember the price of underestimating the resilience of the human spirit.